20 years ago, Camilla Parker Bowles was arguably the most unpopular woman in Britain. Blamed by much of the public for the collapse of Charles and Diana's marriage, she was booed at events, dissected in headlines, and given almost no chance of ever being accepted at the center of the monarchy. Today she's queen. She stood beside Charles at his coronation in 2023, wearing Queen Mary's crown, in a ceremony that would have seemed unthinkable a generation earlier. That transformation, from the most resented figure in the royal story to a working queen consort with her own patronages, her own causes, and a genuinely rehabilitated public image, is one of the most remarkable rebuilding jobs in modern royal history. This video is about how that happened, what her actual role looks like today, and how the palace around her is quietly changing as Charles manages a cancer diagnosis and William takes on more of the institution's weight. If you're into royal history and want the real story instead of the rumor mill, stick with me, and consider subscribing so you catch the next one. Royal reporting has a problem, and it's worth naming up front. A huge amount of what circulates online about the royal family, especially anything involving secret scandals, dramatic confrontations, or leaked family showdowns, is either loosely sourced tabloid speculation or, increasingly, entirely fabricated content designed to look like investigative journalism. Fake stories about secret yacht trips, hidden financial deals, or private family blow-ups spread fast because they're dramatic. They just usually aren't true. The real story of Camilla's place in the monarchy doesn't need any of that. It's genuinely compelling on its own. A decades-long rehabilitation, a marriage that survived enormous public hostility, and now a woman navigating what her role looks like as the institution around her reorganizes itself for the future. To understand where Camilla stands now, you have to go back to where she started. Her relationship with Charles predates his marriage to Diana, and after the divorce and Diana's death in 1997, Camilla became, for years, one of the most publicly loathed figures connected to the royal family. Palace strategists reportedly treated her rehabilitation as a long, deliberate project. Not a single announcement, but a slow, carefully paced reintroduction to public life stretched out over years. Royal commentators have pointed to that patience as the key to why it worked. Rather than pushing Camilla into the spotlight, the approach was to let her step back and allow Charles to lead, particularly in their earliest joint public appearances after their 2005 marriage. That measured pace, letting the public get used to her gradually rather than all at once, is widely credited with easing the hostility over time rather than provoking more of it. By the time Elizabeth II died in September 2022, the ground had shifted enough that the late Queen herself had publicly stated her wish, expressed in her Platinum Jubilee message, that Camilla be known as Queen Consort when Charles became king. That endorsement mattered enormously. It gave Camilla an institutional stamp of approval that no amount of good press alone could have provided. So what does Camilla actually do? Her official role, as described by the palace, is to support the king in his work and duties while carrying out public engagements on behalf of the charities and causes she personally champions. That's a broad mandate, and in practice it covers a specific and consistent set of issues she's built her public identity around. Domestic abuse support, osteoporosis awareness, cancer support, and literacy, particularly children's reading. Following the major review of royal patronages launched after Charles's accession in 2022, Camilla also took on a number of causes previously held by Elizabeth II, including roles connected to the Royal Literary Fund, the Royal Academy of Dance, and the Royal Voluntary Service, along with becoming president of the Sandringham branch of the Women's Institute. That kind of patronage transfer is normal institutional housekeeping. When a monarch dies, their causes have to go somewhere, and senior royals typically absorb a portion of them. Her public visibility has stayed high and consistent into 2026, appearing at state visits, trooping the color, garden parties, and diplomatic receptions alongside Charles, as well as her own solo engagements tied to her patronages. This is a woman who, whatever the earlier hostility, has settled into a genuinely active working role. None of Camilla's current position can be understood without the context that's been reshaping the entire institution since February 2024. King Charles's cancer diagnosis. The palace announced it that month, without specifying the type of cancer, and confirmed he was beginning treatment. He paused public-facing duties briefly, then resumed them once doctors felt his progress allowed it. But the treatment has continued, and it has visibly affected the pace and scale of his working life ever since. This is the single biggest force reorganizing the modern monarchy, and it's happening in relatively plain sight, even if the palace doesn't narrate it that way. When a reigning monarch has less capacity, the work doesn't disappear, it gets redistributed. Over the past 2 years, that has meant William taking on a steadily larger share of visible royal duties. Representing the crown on more overseas visits, leading more high-profile domestic engagements, and generally being described by royal commentators as functioning, in practice, more and more like a monarch in waiting, even though no formal transfer of authority has occurred. Camilla's position sits inside that same shifting landscape. She's not the one whose public capacity is being managed for health reasons, but she is part of an institution where the center of gravity has been quietly moving toward William and Catherine as a working pair, partly out of necessity and partly because that's simply what modern monarchies do when planning for continuity. Here's where the story connects to something concrete and verifiable, rather than speculative. The working royal family has genuinely gotten smaller over the past several years, and that shrinkage has been very public. Prince Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties in 2020 and relocated to the United States, removing 2 working royals from the roster entirely. Prince Andrew's departure from public royal life has been even more dramatic and more recent. Following the collapse of his public standing over his association with Jeffrey Epstein, Charles stripped him of his military titles and royal patronages, and in 2025 Andrew lost the use of Royal Lodge, his longtime Windsor residence, and was formally removed from the substance of royal life, even retaining no working title. Royal commentators have called it the most serious crisis for the institution's public standing since the abdication of Edward VIII in 1936, notably resolved this time without anyone giving up the throne, through the more modern tool of stripping titles and public roles rather than a dramatic royal exit. The practical result is that the front line of working royals representing the crown publicly has narrowed to a smaller, tighter group. Charles and Camilla, William and Catherine and Princess Anne, who remains one of the most active working royals in the family despite holding no expectation of the throne. That's a much smaller operation than the monarchy Elizabeth II presided over for most of her 7 decades, when a wider circle of extended family members regularly handled regional and ceremonial engagements. This matters for understanding Camilla's position, because a smaller institution concentrates scrutiny. There are fewer people to spread the workload and the public attention across, which means every senior royal's individual role, what causes they champion, how visible they are, how their office is run, carries more relative weight than it would have in a larger family. One real and well-documented shift worth examining is Catherine's return to full public duties. After completing her own cancer treatment and stepping back from the bulk of her public schedule through much of 2024, Catherine returned to a heavy program of engagements starting in 2025, and by 2026 she and William have been consistently visible together at major state occasions, including standing alongside Charles and Camilla at events like the state banquet for Nigeria's president in March 2026, where Catherine notably wore Queen Mary's lover's knot tiara, a piece with deep symbolic history in the family's jewelry collection. The Princess of Wales's team has also taken on a heavier coordinating role behind the scenes, consistent with William and Catherine increasingly being described, by royal watchers rather than official statements, as functioning as the monarchy's most prominent working pair after Charles and Camilla themselves. That's a natural consequence of William's position as heir and his father's health situation, not evidence of any hidden conflict. Institutions plan for continuity. Royal households, in particular, have always adjusted who does what based on who's available, who's healthy. It's worth pausing here to talk directly about how stories about the royal family get made and spread online, because it's relevant to almost everything you'll encounter searching this topic. Legitimate royal reporting, the kind published by outlets with editorial standards and named sources, tends to look fairly unglamorous. Its engagement lists, patronage announcements, official statements from Buckingham Palace, and analysis from royal correspondents who've covered the institution for years and have real sourcing relationships. It rarely involves secretly filmed confrontations, leaked private meetings with word-for-word dialogue, or dramatic reveals about hidden financial scandals involving named private businessmen. When you see a royal story built around an alleged secret document, a private meeting nobody could have actually recorded, or a scandal involving elaborate corporate structures and named individuals with no actual news coverage anywhere else, that's a signal to slow down. Genuine wrongdoing involving public figures, when it's real, tends to be reported by multiple outlets with actual name sourcing, not a single dramatic narrative video with no citations. The Andrew situation is a good comparison point. That story was reported for years by multiple outlets, with named legal proceedings, documented evidence, and official palace statements confirming the outcome. That's what a real royal scandal actually looks like as it unfolds. Messy, slow, multi-sourced, and confirmed institutionally. Not a single tidy narrative that resolves in one dramatic meeting. There is a real structural point worth making about Camilla's long-term position, and it doesn't require any invented scandal to be interesting. As queen consort, much of her institutional standing is tied to Charles's reign specifically. When he eventually dies, under the arrangement publicly confirmed around the time of their marriage, Camilla is expected to become known as Queen Dowager, retaining her title and certain residences, but the major royal estates, Sandringham, Balmoral, passed to William as the new monarch, not to her. That's simply how hereditary succession works, and it's been true and publicly understood since long before any of the recent speculation cycles. It doesn't require a secret power struggle to be true. It's built into the structure of the monarchy itself, the same way it applied to previous queens consort and queen dowagers throughout British history. What her practical day-to-day support looks like in that future, in terms of staffing and institutional resources, will naturally depend on decisions made by whoever is reigning at the time. That's not a dramatic revelation. It's just how a hereditary institution is built. The real story of Queen Camilla isn't a secret downfall engineered behind closed doors. It's the story of one of the more unlikely image rehabilitations in recent royal history. A woman who spent decades as public enemy number one slowly, patiently building a working royal role that the country largely accepts today. It's also a story that's currently unfolding inside a monarchy that's genuinely getting smaller and more careful, reshaped by a king's cancer treatment, an heir taking on more responsibility, and the fallout from one of the most serious scandals the family has faced in generations. The real one involving Andrew, not an invented one involving a yacht. None of that needs embellishment to be interesting. The actual documented version of this story is a case study in patience, institutional adaptation, and what it takes to survive decades of public hostility and come out the other side with the title of queen. So that's where things actually stand. A queen consort with a real, active public role. A king managing his health while still working. An heir stepping into more responsibility by necessity rather than conspiracy. And an institution that's proven, through the Andrew situation, that it can handle a genuine crisis without inventing one. If this kind of grounded, fact-checked look at the royal family is useful to you, a like helps more people find it instead of the speculative stuff, and subscribing means you won't miss the next one. Let me know in the comments what part of Camilla's story surprised you most, and I'll see you in the next video.